We're here to talk about Jesus by way of Dietrich Bonhoeffer and his lectures on Christology from
from from the, from the original Reichstag.
no.
Oh no.
Okay, Josh, sing because I don't know.
Dig a little deeper. Now, I was speaking of all that's going on in the world. I was thinking a little bit about we did some of this when we were covering the Barmen Declaration, but Bonhoeffer revisits the right and left hand of God tonight. So that's
and in the spirit of the day, if you all want to clap on 1 and 3.
all right. Here goes. When you came to me with your bad dreams and your fear, it's easy to see you've been crying. Seems like everywhere catastrophe reigns. Who really profits from dying? I could hold you in my arms. I could hold you forever. I could hold you in my arms. I could hold you forever. When you kiss my lips, my mouth so full of questions, worried mind too quiet. Place your hands on my face, close my eyes and say, love is a poor man's, don't prophesy. I could hold you in my arms. I could hold you forever. I could hold you in my arms. I could hold you forever. So now we see how your fist begets the spear. Weapons of war, symptoms of madness. Don't let your eyes refuse to see. Don't let your ears refuse to hear. You're never gonna shake the sense of sadness. I could hold you in my arms. I could hold on forever. I could hold you in my arms. I could hold on forever.
And that is what and by whom. It sounds familiar again.
Ray LaMontagne.
I thought so.
hold you in my arms.
Isn't he died, right?
I don't think so. If you're thinking that, are you thinking real recent?
No. Oh, I'm thinking of Rufus Wainwright. Is he dead?
I don't think he's dead either. His
What
father.
about Walter Mondale? Is he alive?
Doing great.
Okay. So we are going to talk about Christ as the center of existence and history. But I want to start in nature. But Josh and Todd, I want to hear from you. Because I already subjected some people to my summary notes this morning from this section. But I want to start with part 2, the historical Christ. Can you guys talk about the distinction between the quote unquote Jesus of history versus the Christ of faith, and how that is kind of presented, in education as pastors are formed in a lot of contexts, and how that kind of seeps into scholarly interpretation of the New Testament?
I mean, as best I can recall, the distinction is found in liberal theology. And by liberal, we don't mean partisan politics. We mean something that came about the turn of the last century and was, to borrow a phrase from Bonhoeffer, the world come of age. We got too big for our britches. We thought we had figured things out with the Enlightenment, and so we sought to go back into the scriptures with reason alone. And so things like the historical critical method of reading scripture come about, and we think that we can empirically, with reason, get behind the text and see what objectively is there. And so this distinction arises where there's the things that you can prove empirically, the Christ of history, the Jesus of history, and then the Christ of faith is what people just believe. That's that's a faith claim, and that can't be proven through reason alone. And so you get this artificial divide that doesn't. It weakens the claims of the church and tries to seek to make us stand on firmer ground that doesn't have to do with Jesus. It has to do with our own estimation of what we can discover. Is that a...
That's good. That's good.
Okay.
Todd, what would you add to that?
I just would probably add that maybe it'd be important for people to know that this project has been tried and failed repeatedly to be successful. That this original this questing for the historical Jesus, as it was called, never really delivered on its promise. And so there was always, one way to kind of, I think, amplify what Josh has said is that it's this ongoing doubling down, if you will, that we've got to get to this place, which then I think really just exposes our very high self-estimate, our high regard for our own abilities to conceive of something beyond faith when it comes to the proclamation of the good news, and it makes us kind of the arbiter of what can or can't be said, and that just fails. I mean, even no matter how many times you pick it up, it just is never delivered.
Yeah.
The ways that the Bonhoeffer interrogates it for us is that one of the things he lifts up is that if the resurrected Christ is known in the present, And when we seek to prove God's existence or Jesus's personhood in history, we're trapping something in the past.
Hmm.
We did a number of ways where we try to, you'll see the books on the shelves where people try to, act like they're an investigative journalist and they're interrogating the empty tomb. Or you see this when people, branches of the church, lean so heavily on inerrancy, right? That we're concretizing the scriptures and we've located these things in the past, but we're cutting our feet off from the only way this is legitimate if the resurrected Christ is still experienced and present today.
And what's important, so Bonhoeffer's doing this in 1932, 33. So he's at the kind of the end of the wave, this first wave of historical critical scholarship of the New Testament. And I think it's important for people to understand that um, the Big C Church reacted to modernism, and in particular Darwinism, and natural selection, um, in one of two ways, right? Well, they're both the same way. That modernism challenged the faith claims made by Christianity, and so left liberal Christianity and fundamentalist Christianity retreated into similar boxes, and that was, well, in the face of scientific method, we can treat the Bible uh, as a document and interrogate it scientifically, just as you would any other object, animal, piece of literature. And so fundamentalists do it by, as Josh mentioned, fundamentalists did it by asserting this doctrine of inerrancy, and painting themselves into all kinds of impossible corners, trying to demonstrate how every jot and tittle of Scripture is divinely inspired and without error. But liberals make the same move, right? Um, it's just different. Liberals responded to it by like, okay, well, we can investigate the scriptures scientifically, objectively, as a historical document. And by doing that, we can push aside um, miracle stories, for example, and get at the Jesus of history who is behind these narratives. So a good example, right, Todd? Like you and I both preached on John 9 the last couple of weeks. Like every commentator, like that people will pick up off of a church library shelf, will spend an inordinate amount of time wanting to argue that John chapter 9 is a later addition to the gospel story, and that it reflects not the time of Jesus, but a time later in the history of the church, as though like that matters at all. um, um, yeah. So liberalism and fundamentalism are they're both coming out of the same concern, and Bonhoeffer alludes to it right here in the first paragraph of part two, um, when he says the preaching of the church would be an illusion if this distinction between Jesus and Christ were possible. And so, like, what Bonhoeffer's saying there is the very same thing that we heard him say, on page one of these lectures. That we have to start with the who of Jesus, the who that's given to us by the church. And fundamentalism and liberalism fundamentally portray a lack of faith in the gospel promise. And Bonhoeffer's, he's insisting that, like, no, we have to start with the faith given to us by the saints. And therefore this modern preoccupation with the Jesus of history versus the Christ of faith is not possible, because it is not compatible with the apostolic witness. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
And so really, like, Bonhoeffer's demonstrating that sola scriptura and sola fide are the same thing. That, like, if you're not going to start with the resurrected Christ in the present who gifts us faith, then what are we doing? Okay. Well, yeah. All right. We're in total agreement. Okay. Well, I was expecting some pushback, so here I did want to further down on that same page. This is 328. Bonhoeffer says for liberal theologies, and it's important. Stanley Harris likes to point out most often when Bonhoeffer's talking about liberalism, he's thinking of not United Methodism. He's thinking of Methodism. That like we're kind of quintessentially the liberal tradition in the modern era. Bonhoeffer says for liberal theology stands and falls first of all by its distinction between Jesus and Christ. It considers Christ to be the Jesus who is enthusiastically idolized by the church community. Jesus is not Christ in his own being, in his own person, but rather in his effect upon others. The judgment of Jesus' church community about Jesus Christ must be kept strictly separate from Jesus' actual being, says liberal theology. And I think this is like one of the hallmarks, right, Josh, of liberal theology, starting in the 19th century is arguing for the utility of Christianity based on its subjective effects on people. And so you don't have to worry about whether or not Jesus was born of a virgin. Christianity like makes better citizens. It makes more obedient children. When I go to worship, I feel a certain thing, in my spirit, in my heart. It gives me hope. Like Bonhoeffer's ruling all of that out too.
Yeah. What's Hauerwas's other line? Jesus is my personal Lord and Savior. There's that odd figure of speech where it's like, I consider him Lord. You can do what you want. No.
Jesus is Lord, but that's just my personal opinion. That
Yeah.
the first part of that sentence invalidates the second part of the sentence.
Exactly.
But yeah, and so one of the tools I think Bonhoeffer gives us is if you're in a quote unquote religious Christian setting, is Jesus presented in himself as the truth, or is he merely a device that gives us a certain feeling? I'm not saying that well, but
yeah, I mean, is he a substitute for a life coach, a way to hack your personal happiness, any of those kinds of things that are about your subjective experience rather than is he Lord and do we act accordingly? One of the things that we'll talk about probably elsewhere in tonight's reading is that, think of how to say this. Bonhoeffer likes before us that we have limitations, and Christ is not only the center of our existence, but he's also the boundary, and he stands in our place. And there are all these places before us, behind us, that we find out we can't peer into, right? And so Jesus is not only the God's word spoken that makes these promises, but he's also the fulfillment of these promises. So we're totally dependent on God's work in Jesus for our story and for the course of history. It all bends towards Jesus. So
yeah, Troy makes a good point here. Isn't the distinction between the Jesus of history and the Christ of faith just a rehash of the early heresies that sought to separate Jesus' human and divine natures? And I think that's true. Bonhoeffer addresses Docetism, which is the heresy that Jesus was not truly fully human; he just appeared to be human. He's God in an egger suit. And liberal theology commits whatever the opposite of docetism is, it's that, right? You start with the conviction, well, like obviously Jesus is really just a human, and not God. And so let's pull away the accretions of tradition, and orthodoxy to get at the Jesus who is just fully human. So Troy's right. They're the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
And Josh, I was thinking, one of the things, you were saying there, Bonhoeffer's very concerned about the necessity and authenticity of Christian community. And that I cannot be a Christian without you. And Todd cannot be a Christian without each of us. Like that we are necessarily bound to each other. And so I think part of what motivates Bonhoeffer's insistence on Jesus being the center of all things and not merely an accessory to our lives, is that like Bonhoeffer wants to rule out any notion that you can be a Christian by yourself.
Yeah.
And I think that's behind also the second section of part 2 here, where he's talking about critical and negative Christology. That there is the witness of the apostles that's been passed down to us, that we must hold on to, and so reject liberal theology. But at the same time, there's a whole lot we don't know and cannot know. And I think part of what motivates that for Bonhoeffer is any kind of certainty that makes it so that I don't have to be dependent upon the two of you to know who Jesus is.
Mm-hmm. I don't want to jump back too far, but there was that line at top of 329 where he is talking about the Reed's failure or pointing to the failures of liberal theology. I thought this is at least worth highlighting. On the positive side, that from now on the New Testament can only be correctly interpreted historically if its own presuppositions are taken seriously, namely that Jesus is the Kyrios, the Lord. So I think that then sets up for his continued insistence that Jesus is the center and the boundary. That then makes plain, since we're drawn into that community, that there is no room for an individual faith. As Newbegin called it, our faith can be personal; it can be private.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's an important distinction, because we tend to read or hear or insert private when we use the word personal.
Mm-hmm.
And I think whereas, and I don't know if that it works out on both sides of that left right or liberal fundamentals divide, but I think there are probably illustrations on both sides where we've decided to make personal private, and I think in that move actually it's a denial that Jesus is Lord.
Yeah, that's really because so like that was the first reading that we did, right? That Bonhoeffer, like Luther, wants to insist that the gospel is really only gospel when Josh knows that it isn't Christ is risen. It's Christ is risen for me. Mm-hmm. That pro me, that sense of the gospel being personal is critical. That if Josh doesn't know that it's for him, it's just information. It's not proclamation. But that's different than making Christianity a private spirituality. That and again, like again, it's Eros, right? Like Jesus is Lord.
Right.
Jesus is Lord, but that's just my private personal opinion. Like that doesn't make any sense.
No.
No. And I think too, I don't again, I know people who will listen to this are coming from all kinds of different traditions, and Todd, you and I and Josh are from different places, but I
I want to speak to that, by the way. That's all.
but yeah, so there's I just want, believers and people who are curious about the faith to be aware that there's an entire like cottage industry in like the publishing world, um um to lead you to believe that the claims that the church has made and does make about Jesus are not claims that Jesus made about himself.
Mm,
Um,
mm,
like I hear, I
right.
like, there's any number of books and curricula and whatnot that people can um, be on the receiving end of. And I simply I don't know what gospels they're reading. That like I've been having to do this every week for long enough to know that like, well, like it's there's there's a reason they killed him. you know it's because of the claims that he made for himself, and yeah, so, and that doesn't mean you have to be a Christian, and that doesn't mean you have to believe, but I do think, like, if you're going to read the New Testament, like, um it does violence to the text to not accept that this is the premise, um
Right.
that the New Testament presumes that Jesus Christ is identifiable with the God of Israel.
Mhm.
And if you're reading it any other vein, you're misreading it.
Yeah. That's the I want to say,
That's like me saying that, like, well, I'm not like, the Quran is really about helpful advice for how to be a husband. Like, no, like that's like no, like that's not what it's about. Like,
yeah. So another aspect, another facet of this conversation, Bonhoeffer has a line in here about how heresy is an important word. If Christians are going to hold to doctrines that are at the heart of who this Christ is, and we understand to be. But he also names that in his own day, and I would say it's true of ours, is that we're wanting for some kind of ecumenical council, the Church Catholic, to come together and say, we may have our own subjectivity with our experience as this part of Christ's body, a denomination, a tradition, but we really don't have a way that we all come to the table like they did when um, there were the first, at least 7 ecumenical councils. The Church Catholic was coming together and saying, uh, these are non-negotiable. These things are not essential. Um, but we don't have a way to carry on that conversation today. And one of the ways that we see that carried out is whether it's political power on the national stage or local, that somebody's subjectivity says, well, this is my personal conviction and this is what I think is right, and therefore you should live by it. And that's a really dangerous place to be.
mm-hmm.
And it's a stance where it's, rather than saying everything goes, is that I can't be Christian without you, and therefore we all need to come to the table together as one body because we need to recognize that we have difference. Um, uh, yeah,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and yeah, it is interesting, right? That we're more connected globally um, because of technology than we've ever been, um, and yet, you know, that kind of dialogue is more fractured, probably than ever before.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, it's yeah, I do think it's especially like in an attention economy, I think it's important for Christians to take the time to listen to each other. You know, to like put put the phone down and like listen. But also, um, I think it's, important for Christians in America, at least, to remember that, like, when we talk about loving our neighbor, um, like, the most number of neighbors that you have are the dead Christians who came before you. Um, and to love them by listening to them. Um, that, yeah, that's, yeah, okay. Let's go back to the beginning. So Todd, kind of walk us through Christ the center here in these opening sections.
Well, I'm not going to be your best resource this evening. My day wrangling 4 grands was.
All right. Well,
I didn't get all of that, so you're
okay,
gonna have to jump in there.
We should call Marty.
Yeah, we should.
Let's go from another class. Okay. So, so,
we wrestled with the who last week.
Right.
He's adding on to that this week.
Yeah. So, Bonhoeffer wants to place Christ at the center of all things. And so, he begins with Christ is the center of our existence, Josh's existence, my existence. And then he wants to so you can think of it in terms of, in a Bardian way, concentric circles. Christ is the center of my existence. Christ is the center of history. And he's got these paragraphs here about history being messianic, which I think is important. That Christ occupies, like Jensen takes this and he wants to say that, God is making a history with us. The history is the story that God is making with humanity. And I think, yeah, so Bonhoeffer wants to say the same thing by saying that history is messianic in the sense that it's structured according to promise and fulfillment.
Mm-hmm.
That God has made promises to us in both testaments. That God makes promises to us in the present through the proclamation of the church and the gospeling of one Christian to another, and that history, time, is bent towards the fulfillment of those promises.
And we discussed patient in that we have not been able to fulfill those promises to someone to be the answer to that.
Yeah. And so like the good part of Christ being the center of history is that there is a will behind all things. There is a meaning behind all things. There is a momentum and a direction, a telos, right? That doesn't mean that it's easy for us to discern, or that everything that happens is good, or that there are not events that are contrary to the will of God. It just means that, when we look back, God is going to be able to gather up all of this according to his purpose. Which is, I made a joke about the occupation of Washington D.C. at the beginning of this, but so sometimes the news beats you down, and sometimes like the mundane details of your life can just seem like there's no purpose. And so Bonhoeffer, like, Christ is the center of my existence. Christ is the center of all the things that happen. And eventually, in the fullness of time, those promises will turn towards their fulfillment.
Yeah. So I experienced this. You guys were talking about John 9. I'm going through Ephesians right now. New appointments. Thought it'd be good to talk about God's story and his gift to the church as we get into a new. And so I found myself in chapter 3, verses 14 through 21.
Uh-huh.
Which, if you don't recall off the top of your head, says, "For this reason I bow my knee before the Father, from whom every family in heaven and on earth is named, that according to the riches of his glory he may grant you to be strengthened with power through his Spirit in your inner being, so that Christ may dwell in your hearts through faith, that you, being rooted and grounded in love, may have strength to comprehend with all the saints what is the breadth and length and height and depth, and to know the love of Christ that surpasses knowledge, that you may be filled with all the fullness of God." Um, I think there's something here about revelation, that we discover our limitations, and a lot of times in the Western world, we've just been formed already. We are not. Uh, we don't get choice out of the womb, and we've already been formed in a story. And part of that story that we're told from very young is that we are individuals. And so sometimes when we hear this strengthen in your inner being, I naturally think of how God is going to strengthen me and my subjectivity. Um, but a little bit of research into how other saints have read this text, that inner being is actually indicative of what Bonhoeffer's talking about, is Christ being the center. And Christ is the center, not of you as in Josh, but as in you, third person plural, the church. And he is strengthening us in faith to know what is the inscrutable mystery that is God, because we come up against all these limitations, and that we might know with all the saints like Job, who in the 11th chapter, his conversation partner, his friend Zophar, is asking him, "Can you find out the deep things of God? Can you find out the limit of the Almighty? It's higher than heaven. It's deeper than Sheol. Its measure is longer than the earth and broader than the sea." He's just kind of reiterating that, like, at the heart of who God is this mystery, and it's inscrutable. We don't know it, but we have seen and touched and tasted and heard that mystery in the person of Jesus. And he is the fulfillment of this messianic story and messianic promise. And it's a, it's a reiteration of the Christ is both then in the outer bound, the limits of our knowledge. But Christ is making himself known to us.
Yeah, that's it's good. And speaking of limitation, Josh, you alluded to this earlier about the left and right hand of God. On page 326, Bonhoeffer's talking about Christ, uh, Christ being the center of history, um, and one of the so it isn't just that history is messianic in that it's ordered according to promise and fulfillment. It's also that Christ is the center of history, as the church, um, um, with and over and against the state. And I think those are, um, I think, and again, I started with a kind of a, gallows humor about current events. Um, there is a way of thinking about, um, the church's role is to be prophetic to the state, right? Um, um, but Bonhoeffer, doesn't see it those kind of black and white terms, that Christ is present in the church at the center of history to remind the state, is what Bonhoeffer says, to remind the state of its finitude and limitations. But Christ is also present in the world through the kingdoms of this world. So it's left hand, right hand. These are God's two hands. So I think a lot of liberal Christians today, who would call themselves progressives instead, think of to the extent that Jesus is alive, and not an item of the past. I think a lot of Christians today think of Jesus is active through the church to witness against the state. And Bonhoeffer wants to say, well, no, God's present like everywhere and at work everywhere. And he's working through the church for this purpose. But he's also, at work in the world in these other ways. And he's got this great line here. Where is it? I know I underlined it. The state has existed in its truest sense only since there has been a church. So that, for Bonhoeffer, the state is only the state when it is being reminded of its temporal limitations. And
Well, read the second sentence behind that.
The true origin of the state is only found together with the church on the cross, insofar as the cross fulfills and affirms law and order, and at the same time breaks through it. And as a result, the cross of Christ is doubly present to us. It is present to us in the forms of both the church and the state. Christ himself is present to us, takes shape only in this twofold form, but is only present to us if we live by his cross. I think Todd Dennis had a pushback last week that Bonhoeffer is too focused on the cross, and isn't emphasizing the resurrection as much. And Bonhoeffer doesn't put it in these terms, but again, he is a Lutheran. That I think one of the things he's concerned about is an emphasis on the resurrection can produce a theology of glory, as Luther would put it, rather than a theology of the cross. And so it's important that the resurrected Christ still is the crucified Christ. And this is the concern of liberal theology, right? That if you're just focusing on like what Jesus can do for you, the feelings Jesus has, the experience you get in worship, you can that can lead to what Luther calls a theology of glory, where you have religious practices and political convictions and ways in the world that no longer correspond to the character that is crucified on Calvary. And that is the Christianity. That is the dominant form of Christianity in Bonhoeffer's time that then capitulates to authoritarianism. Because it's so far downstream of the crucified Christ that people have lost the ability to say no.
Yeah, it's power and triumph rather than humiliation, right? Go ahead, Todd.
Yeah, that was a line that he picks up on the bottom of 325. History finds its meaning in the humiliation of Christ. So then to pick up and take those paragraphs that we just were looking at and the part that Jason just read would be a good way to understand why Bonhoeffer is in fact making the point that God is at work in the church, in the state, in the world, and that it is in the humiliation of Christ that that does avoid that theology of glory.
And I think people can hear this wrong. So I want to take Dennis's pushback seriously. That when Bonhoeffer talks about the crucifixion and humiliation, that is not to valorize humiliation,
Right.
or um accursed modes of execution, right? Like,
Right. Right. Right.
but like what Bonhoeffer is pointing to is that the meaning of history is humility. The meaning of history is gentleness. The meaning of history is truthfulness. It's all of those attributes exemplified by Jesus, that either lead to his crucifixion or are the ones that he refuses to let go of,
Hmm.
in the face of crucifixion. He's not, because there is a way there's a way of
Right.
talking about the crucifixion that is itself a theology of glory, right?
Yes. Yes.
So
Yeah.
he's not lifting up the cross as like, it's so awesome that Jesus got crucified. He's
Right.
he's pointing you to, like, if you want, like um,
Well, that's like the I love the line in the Tom Waits song, "Come on up to the house." It's like, "Come down off the cross, we can use the wood," which I don't take Tom Waits to be saying to Jesus. I take him to be saying to somebody who's too big on themselves. They're making themselves unnecessarily a martyr, and saying, that's not what's called for here. In you're so steeped in this that you're missing the forest for the trees, and making this uh humiliated act, you're valorizing it. Yeah.
is it bad that, like, I only really know Tom Waits from the movie Shortcuts by Robert Altman?
Nothing wrong with that.
Have you guys seen that movie?
Mhm.
Has anyone seen that movie? Um, so Raymond Carver, one of my favorite writers of all time, had a series of shorts. Well, he's a short story writer. And Robert Altman cobbled together a whole bunch of these short stories into like a 3 hour long movie. That had, I think Robert Downey Jr.'s in it, and um, Jack Lemmon. Lyle Lovett plays a baker.
Mhm.
Tom Waits plays a hard drinking limousine driver. It's such a good movie. It's such a good movie. And there's a scene in it where so Lyle Lovett is a baker, right? And he's made a cake for some family, like a birthday cake. And they don't come and pick up the cake. And so, like, he gets, like, he like increasingly he gets pissed off, and so, like, he's calling and leaving like terrible messages on this person's phone who hasn't picked up their cake, and they get worse and worse and worse. And what he doesn't know, what he finds out later, is from a different story, that the boy got hit by a car. Um, so
So what's the name of the movie?
Shortcut.
Shortcuts.
it's wonderful. I love it. So anyway, how did we get to Shortcuts? I don't even remember.
Tom Waits.
Wait.
I promised people I had an actual point I was going to share, but now I don't. Oh, you were talking about Tom Waits and the cross. That I think what Bonhoeffer wants us to, the good news in this, but also the wisdom, um, is that, so, we've talked about Stanley a few times. Stanley Herawas famously says that Jesus is Lord and everything else is bullshit. And I think what Bonhoeffer wants us to do is he's helping us. He's trying to give us a way to sort through the bullshit. And by lifting up humiliation and the crucifixion, he's saying, yes, Jesus is the center of our existence. Jesus is the center of history. Jesus is the center of nature. Um, um, and the way you find him in all of those things is in the humility and the gentleness and the patience and the constancy of Christ. It's not in, um, it's not in loud things. Uh,
Hmm.
it doesn't come under banners like Law and Order. Um, it, it comes slowly and quietly.
which connect, I think, in a wonderful way to the Pharisee at the end of our reading, because if Jesus merely hears, but he's really divine, and only
Mm-hmm.
then whatever we think of as humanity is just something that he takes on in vesture. But what Christ reveals to us is that the humanity is a part
It's how
of
he saves us.
it's how he saves us, but it's part of God's nature well before the incarnation 2,000 years ago. And so, whatever we think of as human, we have to recognize first in Jesus, and that comes with the humility and the tenderness and the he we said last week with the line from Dostoevsky, that he's not concerned with access or status, that children and fools love him and look fondly at him, and he has time for them. Um, Jesus kisses the leper clean. Jesus has meals with. That's something fundamental to the nature and character of who God is. And when that's revealed to us, then that is also something that not only can we be forgiven for our offenses, but we can live into our true humanity that's located in Christ, our center.
Yeah. Maybe this to talk about resurrection. Uh, you know, it's I think a way of addressing Dennis's concerns or pushback and being faithful to Bonhoeffer is that in the you see it in the Book of Acts, um y- the way Easter was understood in the early church was as a vindication of this particular life. It isn't that God just needed somebody to die for Josh's sins. It's that Jesus lived this particular life and God plucked it up from death. Because this is the life God wants for all of us. That's why he's called the second Adam. And so the way he saves us isn't simply by dying. It's by embodying this particular way of life, that we can now then find in, the center of our lives. We can discern in the happenings of history. We can try to make sure that's at the center of our church's life. Yeah, it's so. I wanted before we go. Bonhoeffer's got this great little section on page 327, Christ as the center of nature. And because I have been doing a lot of reading since we went to Turkey, Todd, in Maximus the Confessor, I like I like the overlap between Bonhoeffer here, one of the modern theologians, and Maximus, kind of the height of the ancient church fathers. Because I don't, I'm guessing, Todd, a whole lot of people in your neck of the Christian tree are still in the climate change is not a real thing camp, or they're in the well, God's going to burn it all up in the end anyway, so what difference does it make?
Right.
And oh well, by the way, we happen to be sitting in oil fields. Coincidentally, and then Josh and I exist in a different part of the Christian tree where we don't talk a lot about Jesus as Lord or the gospel, but we do talk a lot about Jesus, the teacher and model, and something called creation care. So we we do a lot of talk about creation care, and neither of those like rises
Right.
to the level of what the church's witness to these things are. And Bonhoeffer's taking this wisdom from the church fathers and lifting it up and no, Paul says it isn't just that Josh watched a whole bunch of R-rated movies and therefore he needs a substitute to die for him. it's it's that it's all of creation is subject to sin, is in captivity. That even the rocks cry out, Jesus says. And so whatever we mean by salvation and redemption, it's cosmic in nature. And so Christ is not just at the center of history; he's at the center of all things, and he's becoming all things, as Paul says.
Well, yeah, I love his focus again on the sacrament in this
Mhm.
section, because he's not only saying that all of creation's in need of rescue and redemption, but he's saying he actually is redeemed new creation, like in the bread at the Eucharist, right? So it's not just the wheat, oil, and sun and rain of the fallen world. It is the thing of this world that actually is full of the grace of the living resurrected Christ.
Yeah, I was thinking about this. So like you guys are both pastors, right? Like the people um people volunteer at like a mission center or a soup kitchen, or they go on a mission trip somewhere, and they're living with other like Christians and serving other people, um and invariably, like, they leave those experiences, like, oh well, like, I've never been so happy, or I think I was really the one served, or like all these kind of cliches that are all true, and they're all true because, like, this is who you're supposed to be. like, like you've been brought to like you've been given moments where, like, you've, like, touched your true humanity, right?
Yeah.
And what Bonhoeffer does is, like, no, like, the bread on the altar table to be distributed to all of these people in the Eucharist, that's that's bread being truly bread. That's bread being fully, like, breadness. And that's amazing. So, it isn't like the lion and the lamb lying down together give up their lionness and their lambness. It's like, no, this is what it actually means for them to be lions and lambs. Um, like right now, they're just like, they're lions and lambs in a creation that's captive to sin and death. So they're no more their real selves than Todd Littleton is.
Hmm.
So I don't know how to apply that to otters, which I'm obsessed with, by the way. Like this, like I I follow like 4 different, like, Twitter accounts of just, like, otter things.
Is this a new fascination or an old one?
That's several years old. Yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
good to know.
Before we got our Wyatt, our most recent dog, I was like, why don't you just get an otter? Like, they're really, but apparently it's frowned upon, but is very popular in Japan because,
Hello.
yeah, why have children when you can just have otters instead? Is there anything we missed?
I think so.
That's a good smattering.
Um,
Um, So you want to do 10 pages again?
Yeah.
Bring us
So
to an end.
I didn't, like, call it up. I did. So, full disclosure, I didn't have a lot of time to prepare my sermon for Sunday, because of my son's festivities in South Carolina. But
Still a good sermon, so.
I well, I did. This is not to talk about my sermon. I did think I hadn't noticed before that in John 9, which we've referenced earlier, that I don't know that I'd paid sufficient attention to the fact that, like, this guy's, like, the community doesn't really recognize him anymore. Like, I was like, oh, that's really interesting. But then later, in that narrative, um, I do think the blind man is kind of the paradigmatic, um, kind of Bonhoefferian Christian, right? Like he's like, several times he and his parents are interrogated, by the religious authorities.
Right.
And again and again, the blind man's just like, I don't know. Like,
Yeah.
like, I couldn't see, like, like, that kind of humility, I think, is what Bonhoeffer is recommending to us, right? That, like, we've been given a few things that are true, and we shouldn't let go of them. That Christ is the Jesus of history. But like there are a whole lot of things we need to be humble about and not certain, and certainly not certain in a way that leads us to think that we can be individual Christians.
Yeah, and I like how that after the experience of being healed, he doesn't answer the how or why questions, but he's led in search of the Christ that is the who, and that's revealed to him at the end of the story. You know that I'm.
And it's not. I cut this out, but like Cyril of Alexandria, on that, it's important that Jesus spits in the dirt to create mud to put on his eye, so this like he's making a new creation,
New Adam.
Yeah. Well, so we're gonna read 10 more pages.
So you're going to go 336 to 46.
Yeah. So you send that my way, and we will talk about it.
Yes. Let me write that down.
And so that gets us probably halfway through. So if folks have things they want us to talk about and or read, let me know, and we will put that on the docket. I have a PDF of Philip Ziegler's forthcoming book on the devil, if you guys want to talk about that sometime.
Cool.
I don't know that I have permission to actually, I forget that I said that. Maybe we can do that.
Maybe we can do that.
All right. Well, Josh, how goes it in your new parish? People are asking me.
It's so far. Yeah.
It's what?
It's wonderful so far.
Okay.
Good.
Yeah.
Excellent.
That's a good pastorally answer.
Yeah.
Todd, how are you?
I'm well. You know, I wasn't really complaining about hanging with the grandkids. Getting
we
to
all
do
know
that's fun.
You don't like your grandchildren.
Oh man. Here's the good news.
Father
They
name.
like me. They like me, so it really doesn't matter.
Todd, what do they call? What's your grandfather name?
Doc. Grandpa Doc. So yeah.
It's not because he plays doctor with them.
No.
It's
only you, Jason. Only you.
No, he loves his grandchildren. He doesn't like his son-in-law named Jason. But
no, that's not true either.
He really doesn't like him. But
hey, y'all really loved me this morning when they dropped them all off at my house on their way to work.
Well, so thank you for your time, gentlemen. Thank you, everyone else, for your time and attention, and tolerating us.
I saw a college friend jump on, so maybe he'll let me know what he thinks.